Thank you very much. Yeah. It's a great session, and thank you for organizing this wonderful weather. I've been in Venice many times. Sometimes I say it's maybe maybe it's my third home because I spent 20 years in the US, but I love this place, and in particular when the sun is shining here. Can I just, before we start, ask how many people from the humanities are here? Oh, that's good. There's a few. I'm very happy. And how many people from economics, social sciences do we have here? Don't be shy. Okay, there is a few, and so the rest, I guess, is from have an engineering or natural science background. Is that true? Okay, yeah. So I just wanted to have a sense of who I was talking to. So I have a plan, and I will try to follow this plan a little bit. First, talk about what I mean when I say physical and social technologies. I will try to make a diagnosis of what's going on, and then this is where I sort of have my competencies. I'm a little bit of an amateur in the rest of it, but I know a little bit about the scientific underpinnings of living and intelligent technologies. As Marcello was saying, this is what I've been doing most of my sort of professional life. But I've also, growing up, at least scientifically, at Los Alamos, where they made the atomic bomb, it somehow makes you think about how technology can impact the rest of the world. So that's something that's been that's very near and dear to my heart. And then, of course, we can always be scared and talk about the doomsday, but how can we be constructive? How can we, because I see most of us are engineers and natural scientists, how can we actually engage and make a better world? So my main thesis is, and it's not mine anymore, is that our physical technologies are rapidly moving away from our social technologies. And that's perhaps the 2 points or main points I would like to make. This is the first one. And by physical technology, it's a hammer and a nail, it's a smartphone, it's all these different things, and they are no longer in sync, or rather the social technologies, which are our governance, our law, how we organize our markets, the narratives about how we understand the world, etc. These are getting outdated because of the physical technologies. So the great challenge for all of us is to figure out, on the one hand, how can we implement these and develop these physical technologies to the benefit of most of us, on the one hand, and without wrecking the world in the process, and how can we update the social technologies and our narratives? How can the artists come in and help us understand what's going on, so that we can now again see how the real world really is. So, having studied these new technologies, or these technologies for many years, I didn't invent this, but there's a way to look at this, and I think that I would call it the BINC technology, or the BINC ecology of technologies, is a good name for what's going on, because we have biotechnologies, we have information technology, we have nanotechnologies, and the cognitive technologies, and underneath we have technologies that altogether mimic or implement or develops artificial processes that are lifelike or intelligence-like, and this is what's really important. But it doesn't, and then I like the word BINC, so you'll probably remember BINC. So these BINC technologies are in the process of changing the world, and I think most people, it will be difficult to find people that doesn't agree on that. In the same way as the steam engine and the conveyor belt and factories and whatnot changed the world at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Now, what is the difference between intelligence and life? We can talk long about that, but I just want to give you a sort of a map, a very high-level map, where on the one axis here we can talk about, down in this corner we have a rock. And then up here we have a living cell, a simple cell, a coli bacteria, for instance. And if you look at this axis, we're still having a rock here. And when we go out here, we have Watson, who can beat anybody in chess who can identify diseases better than any doctor, and can find way in Venice better than any person. And up here we have humans. So humans are, they're alive and then they're quite smart. But I mean, the artificial intelligence, the special purpose of artificial intelligence has already surpassed many of our special abilities, and it's sort of rolling very fast out there. My experience, my scientific experience has been trying to crawl up in this direction. So we've been sort of struggling, as I'll have to tell you a little bit about here, in at least the last 15, I mean much longer, but the last 15 or 17 years I've had major projects where I've been leading scientific activities trying to create living material from non-living materials, trying to get to make light from inert materials. But it's this quest that we as humanity are having because our technology is actually getting smarter and it's becoming more lifelike. So I have to talk a little bit about what I'm doing, because these are things I know a little bit about. So we've designed many years ago, back in the early 2000s, we actually designed we came up with an idea for how we could make a minimal living system from scratch. And I don't want to go into all the details, but if we start over here, then without free energy, nothing moves. So our starting point was a metabolism where we have resources and energy, and then this metabolism is able to convert these resources and turn them into building blocks for containers, for a container, and for an informational system. The informational system then controls the metabolic production of the materials, the metabolic production of the building blocks for information building, as well as for the container. And then the container keeps these two guys together. And this has been our design principle ever since, many years ago. And we've been worked ferociously for many years to find out a way to do it. Later on, and it's actually interesting, many years later, we actually people started to see in modern cells that there are echoes of this way of looking at living systems, where you have a big part of the genetic networks that coding for the metabolic process is a big part, that coding for the information processing, as well as for the container. So you can actually see echoes of what we try to do from scratch in modern life. So the most important things that is different when we try to create life and modern life as we know it is that our notion of a container is different. So to make it simple, it's not so easy to create life. So to make it easy, the way you should think about it is that we have think about used chewing gum. You have some sticky stuff, that's a container, and then on the outside of the container we put a metabolic molecule and we put an informational molecule. Actually, we put many of them. And why do we do that? Because then the metabolism has free access to resources and it can get rid of the waste. On the one hand, on the other hand, it is a two-dimensional container so that the metabolic molecules and the informational molecules, they can interact with each other. So in that way, it turns out to be much simpler than modern life. And also, I don't have time to get into that because this is not the story I'll tell here. But we actually use the informational molecule in a different way than we do in modern life. We use the informational molecule's ability or its redox potential directly in the metabolism. So the informational molecule, the nucleic acids, are actually participating directly in the metabolic processes. And I would love to talk about this much more, but I think I shouldn't do that. But what I want to say though is, which I think is of general interest, is that in the beginning, it was in 2007 we got this published. It took a few years to get it through peer review. But before we actually started to do the major experiments, we could calculate the what's it called, the time what is it called, the generation time for these protocells that we wanted to make. And I'm telling this because at that time we didn't know, I'm a theorist, so it's no problem to manipulate with these equations and all these symbols. But of course, for the experimentalist, and by most of the people who's been working on these teams over the years, they are chemists. So they were laughing. They couldn't sit on the chair because we didn't know any of these numbers. But today, the only rate that we have not determined experimentally is the information replication rate. All of them today. This was in 2005 when we started the protocell project at Los Alamos, and then till today. So things has actually things they have really developed. Now, how far are we from creating life? And I think this is probably where many of the groups that are devoted to do that. None of us has created life from scratch yet, and we have over the years, as we have convinced the different funding agencies, the European Commission, the Future Emerging Technology programs back in the old days, they were really adventurous. We could not get this sponsored in the US. I was working at Los Alamos at that time, and we tried and we tried and we tried. And then the Fed office said, well, yeah, we'll sponsor you. And then the Department of Energy, when they realized that I was going to Europe, they said, oh, wait, we'll sponsor you too. So then we got two projects going back in 2004. And then I actually ended up moving back to Europe because there was the people were more, or at least the European Commission was more adventurous than the National Science Foundation. I'm not sure this is true anymore, but that was how it was. And we are still missing a few of the steps. We have not. I think we know exactly what to do here. We haven't done it yet to make a replication of the informational system without using any enzymes, because if you want to create life from scratch, you can't use modern molecular machinery to do it. And we're using screening robotics that for us to find the good reaction conditions, because you have to try again and again for a long time. Another interesting thing I want to mention, I actually have, although one of them broke on the way down here, I have a little thingy here. I can send it around. I think you have seen it already. This is from a project that was led by John McCaskill, and I think this is very cool. We designed a bunch of small microchips that can be solvated, and then they're designed to have a supercapacitor, so they have not a battery but a capacitor, they have energy, and they can move with an electro-osmotic drive. And you can see them this smart dust, you can see it as it's up against the light. They can catalyze chemical reactions, because they can look, you can, by turning on and off small electrodes, you can actually, with electrochemistry, run reactions. They have sensors, so they can, for instance, sense whether there is a high or low pH. And then you have a small finite state machine you can program. These guys are smart. Well, they're not very smart, but they can actually do stuff. And what can they do? Well, they can, if they can detect a chemical and they can create a chemical, well, then they can actually swarm. Because if you make a chemical and I can smell it, and I make a chemical and you can smell it, and we like to go where the chemical is higher, we'll get together. So just like ants, they can actually make swarms. And then if you program your chip so that it makes more than one chemical, actually it's a little more complicated. You have to make three to make this work very well. You have to have 3 chemicals. Then you can have half of the chips by flipping a coin, creating a blue chemical, just to make it easy to remember, and the other half making a a red chemical, and if the blue ones don't like the red and the red ones don't like the blue, you can actually make these swarms split. So you have a replication of the swarm, and then you can give the system new resources. You can fill in new chips so that you now have two swarms at the same size as the original one, and you can then continue to do that indefinitely. And you can, depending on what kind of control you program, you'll have different kinds of dynamics. I have to say these are simulations, as many of you are probably aware of. It turned out that we weren't able to implement all of these things at the same time and make it work, but I'm sure we'll ask for more money to get to that point. Another technology that I think is really important, this is not something that I've done, that I'm working in, this is the top-down synthetic biology, and you've probably heard about CRISPR technology. Are there any biologists here? Oh, so anyways, so the CRISPR technology is a technology to do very precise and inexpensive gene editing. And what is remarkable, at least as far as I'm concerned, is that you can go in already today, actually it's a few years ago, and change and modify the germline. So that means that you can actually change the genetic material for mammalian and from an animal forever. So it's today you can go out and you can buy cows without horns. I mean, I grew up on a farm, and I can tell you sometimes I would wish that they didn't have horns. But that means that you, in principle, could do that. Well, we don't have horns, humans, but we are at the threshold of being able to do some really interesting or scary modification of us as humans. The technology is there. Well, we don't know yet what it takes to make us smarter, but at the end of the day, I don't know, if you have the chance and you can actually make a child more beautiful that you have, or smarter, sometimes I thought it might have been nice if my parents could have made me a little smarter, but these are things that we have to start thinking about. So this is another technology, and the U.S. intelligence office calls CRISPR one of these weapons of mass destruction, or it actually has the potential to do that. Yeah, what do you say? Yeah.
Yes, also for genetic diseases.
Yeah. No, I'm just. Yeah, of course. That there are lots of wonderful things we can do with it. We can cure diseases. We can. We will be able to go in and do personal medicine, and I mean, there's a lot of marvelous things. But I'm just telling you these things because most people, you've heard about genetic engineering for many years, and it's not something that has actually impacted us in any major way, not in a visible way. But we are actually getting closer to the place where we can change, in a biological sense, what it means to be human. Yes, I mean that's how it is with all. I mean, the reason why I'm making these technologies, Billy, or I'm working on these things, is because I believe that you can do something wonderful for humanity. But the more powerful technologies we have, the more damage can we make too. So it puts a lot. We sort of add more and more responsibility on our own shoulders. And since some of us are natural scientists and engineers, well, the policymakers, they have no clue what these technologies can do and what the potential are. So we have a responsibility also to engage and figure out, or help them figure out what makes sense and what doesn't. Another thing I want to mention is 3D printing and open source hardware. I'm sure you all know, or you already know about these things. There's no novelty in that anymore. But a few years ago, we developed a pipetting robot. And here we have an example of how we've used it. This is to determine, make experiments. This is to make experiments. You go, just going. This is to make, when we are trying to figure out how we make good containers. This is a concentration of decanoic acid on one axis, and this is a concentration this is the pH gradient. And so the pH is changed along this axis, and the concentration of fatty acids is changed. Here you can see there is a color difference. And if you put it in a sensitive instrument, you can figure out where you have the vesicles, the containers, and where you don't have the containers. So why are we making those? Well, it's because instead of having a graduate student or an undergraduate student to make each experiment, you can now, once you've programmed this guy, you've made the stock solutions, you can make these experiments at least 10 times faster. I would say you can make it significantly faster. And if you look at the machine, then it's taking less than 200 euros or dollars to actually to get the materials to make the machine. If you want to buy one from one of the instrumentation builders, it costs, well, they have come down quite a bit, but if you have the same properties, you can easily pay $10,000 or euros or more. So that means that in principle I could send anybody who is interested in having such a machine, I could send the design. Of course you would need to have somebody, either it's the young guys, you probably know how to run a 3D printer, how to program it, so you can make it and design it. If not, you would have to hire one of the youngsters to do it for you. So there is something that, and it's because it's open source. So whereas you have to pay much more to buy it from a manufacturer, and it's proprietary. You can't get to the secret and the good stuff inside. So this is what's happening in our scientific community, that we are starting to build our instrumentation again. In the old days when I was a student, I remember we had really good glass blowers and mechanical electrical engineers in the lab to help us build our instruments, and then they disappeared, and then we bought it from instrumentation makers. These times are getting back, where you actually have maker labs or do-it-yourself science maker labs at the universities, where you can go in and you can start to ask questions that you couldn't do before, because before you were forced to ask questions that what is it called, instrumentation makers had instruments that you could use for. So anyways, but how does it look outside the scientific community? Yeah, I have many examples here. This is maybe the most fun one. Per Ödling, one of my collaborators from Sweden, they've been around doing surveys for the industrial companies, leading industrial companies in Sweden. And he was in Skåne in Sweden, and where they make diesel engines. Volvo makes diesel engines, and it's all automated. There was barely anybody in the bay where they made all these machines. And then he asked him, what would happen if tomorrow you were asked to make 50% more diesel engines? Well, then we'd just make 50% more diesel engines, but would it cost more? He'd say, no, it won't cost more. It'll just be, there'll be a little more wear and tear on the machinery, but basically the marginal costs they're close to zero, even for a diesel engine today, because of automation. And of course, it's easy. I think, at least to me, it was kind of a shock when I realized that. But if you look at when you build software, we know that this is the case, because it takes land, it takes humans, it takes capital equipment to make the first piece of software if you're building an operating system on an app. But then if you make one copy or a billion copies, doesn't cost you anything. But if you can sell every copy for the same price, then you can make profit without production costs, as we've had to have all through humanity. So there's some pretty significant things going on. Here's another example from Sweden, and this was the sale of the Swedish Minecraft and Volvo. Does anybody know what Minecraft is? All the boys are nodding, the young ones anyway. So it's a computer game, a very good one. So Volvo was sold to the Chinese holding group for 1.8 billion US dollars, and they had about 23,000 employees. Minecraft was sold for almost a double, and they only had 40 employees. Can you see something's going on here? So I'll just give another example where things are changing. So human intelligence is sometimes not good enough to figure things out, and I already mentioned that finding your way. We're using applications, Google Maps or Apple Maps. If you want to find your love, we're using, what is this? Tinder, yeah. And this is Watson if you want to have a good help to identify what kind of disease you have or what kind of medicine you should give. Now, Yuval Harari, I think he's really one of the major. He's a wonderful person to read. He really understands a lot of things that many of us hadn't seen before. So he's talking about us. I mean, human beings as a sophisticated machines, very sophisticated machine. He's a historian, actually a historian in religious history, but he's trying to look at the big picture and see what's going on. And I'll just pick one thing out, that if you have to decide who you want to marry, then until the Enlightenment and the Renaissance, you have to listen to the scriptures. You have to look in the books, the holy books. There would be prescriptions about what a good man and a wife is, and blah blah blah. And then later on, as we all got enlightened, and then we changed our minds, or the whole perspective got changed, because then we started to believe that we could just listen to this inner voice because we know ourselves what the right thing is. And this is what our judiciary system is based on today also. You know how when you go to court, then there will be somebody who has to decide, and at the end of the day, it's what makes most sense, the conscious. But what Harari is saying is that as more and more of our decision making is being augmented or helped by artificial intelligence, it won't take long before we should actually listen to the AI about who to marry. Because we might think that Susanna or Brigitte they're really wonderful and sexy and whatnot, but maybe Anna and Miriam is a much better fit in the long run. And even though I feel like a unique snowflake, on the earth where there are billions of people, there are a few 100,000 snowflakes like me. And if you can harness the information, the knowledge, the experience of snowflakes similar to me, so that I could maybe have a happier marriage, that was maybe not a bad idea. Anyways, big data is a big deal because we can glean out very detailed information about all kinds of things, and I could talk at length about big data. But this is an important thing, that we are augmenting our intelligence with these things. And I don't think there is going to be anytime soon anyways, a super intelligence who will have this what's it called, this disruption, this crazy, what is it called, singularity, where suddenly the machines will come and take over. At least it's going to take I can't see that this is happening anytime soon. But AI is a big deal that we have to reckon with. Another thing I want to mention is that about self-reproducing machines. As you know, biological systems, they can self-replicate, and our technological ecosystem can make everything. It's not a single machine, but it's a mixture of us humans and all the machines. And we are, at least we can see today, that it's possible to have machines, or maybe a tight ecology of machines that can make copies of themselves. This was considered completely crazy when we proposed that, but then after the 3D printers came out, then everybody said, yeah, I can see that. But nobody has done that yet. But this is something that's at the brink of being possible. And of course it was von Neumann's universal constructor, where he showed there exist mathematical machines that are able to make everything, including copies of themselves. Such machines we will eventually make, I'm sure. We've gotten quite a bit of money from the European Commission to take sort of baby steps towards doing that. Now, what does that all mean? Why should we care about this? Well, the way I see it is that all these technologies, they, because they are heavily based on information and the existence of cyberspace, they are increasingly being collected or converging to what some people call the Internet of Things. So all of these technologies, they are being integrated to this new important infrastructure. And clearly communication, we all know, and data storage happens at the Internet. We have most of the financial transactions, they happen on the Internet too. Most banking. Digital manufacturing is exploding, so that's also linked to it. Transportation, already today by pathfinding, but also or routing, but as we get self-driving cars or self-driving vehicles, then a bigger part of transportation will also be on the Internet of Things. Our energy system is already being controlled from there. All our health data is here. So pretty much I would like for you to come up with some aspect of your lives that will not be influenced by the Internet of Things in some not too distant future. So because that is true, then nation and federal states and government will be responsible for how this infrastructure unfolds and how it's being managed and how it's being governed. Because depending on how this is governed, I think that depending on how we govern this, will determine, well, not all of your life, but a big part of what is possible to do in your life. So that's why we as citizens, because we at least in many countries we have what's it called, democracy, we have to engage. And if you go and talk to, when you go and talk to people in the Danish government, they're clueless about this. So people who, and I'm not sure the Italian government is much smarter in that way. I don't think so. And there are only a few people who understand these things. There's a few heroes here and there. Some of you may have heard about Margrethe Vestager in the European Commission. She's the commissioner for competition. She's the one that sues Apple and Google and for antitrust. She understands some of these things, but most of our governments, they don't understand that. But I can't emphasize enough how important it is how we make this, and it's going to be of course we can always change things, but it's better to get it as right as we can from the very beginning. So we have some grand challenges. Now I'm going to, so how can we fix, or on the one hand, all these technologies, they enable us to do wonderful things, as you said, and I should of course have started out saying that synthetic biology can be used to cure diseases and all kinds of things. So you can do wonderful things and you can do terrible things. And one of the big problems we have today with big data and data storage and communication is that digital monopolies like Google and Microsoft and Apple, they steal our data. I mean, in return we get free services. But as we use the cloud, we also give away our data. And how can we solve that problem? I mean, how can we as a scientist solve that problem? I'll give you an example of how we can use a physical technology to change the world, and also a social technology to change the world. So the physical technology I've been part of making, it wasn't my idea, it was Matteo Monti's idea, but we figured out that we can use a Raspberry Pi that, it's this little machine like this one here, we hook that up with a flash drive, and some of you I'm sure know it, and by having a flash drive, then we can, thank you, so by having a flash drive, we can then, we don't need to use the cloud, because if we network in small villages, well, first of all, the hardware is less than 100 euros. If we network in small villages, where we share data that is encrypted. And we calculated we have to be about, this is the village size. So if we have a village size of about 36, then we have a data lifetime that is expected. If we look at, look at technical data for how often these guys they break, that's comparable to the age of the Earth. So it'll be much more secure than the centralized data structures or the data centers. And they can self-repair, because if you have a community that are sharing data that are encrypted, that means that only you can see the pictures that you don't want your neighbors to see, because they're completely scrambled. And you will have faster recovery of data, because even if you want to have data from Iceland or from one of the centralized data centers, it has to come through the same pipelines, the same network as your local network. At the end of the day, it has to come through the local network. And since you have all your data stored in your local network, we will expect faster, faster response time. And by having such a little guy here, we only uses about 3 watts when it's going full power. Whereas, and if you then look at how much it costs in terms of energy for the data, for each gigabyte of data that's used in Google's on Facebook's, then we're down 2 or 3% of the energy. And this is a big deal, because the data centers, they use more energy, or they produce more CO2 than the global airline traffic. And the data centers, they took over the airline traffic in terms of the global airline traffic back in 2013. And I know many people are still feeling that, ooh, I feel bad whenever I go flying. Yeah, you should feel bad probably a little bit. But you should also feel bad when you're stalking your girlfriend or boyfriend on Facebook, because that takes up, it uses a lot of energy, or when you're Googling a lot. So anyways, so such a system here will support telecommunication, cryptocurrency, and distributed state administration. We can eliminate, with these systems here, we will be able to, you've probably heard about blockchains. Blockchains are kind of a primitive version of, there are many other systems out there that are much more efficient. Blockchains, they take up a lot of energy, and it's big bitcoins, they take up a lot of energy. There are other ways to make cryptocurrency, and there's another way of making these self-organized distributed ledgers. And we have the technology to do it. And for you to get it, it's $100. So by doing that, we can simply disrupt the global market for cloud data. We can simply eliminate it. So and this is if I compare with how we did up in Denmark, there was back in the 70s, one of my professors, Nadim Meyer, he said, look, we don't need nuclear power, we can actually go with green energy. And the government said, oh, that's impossible. So he sat down there with a couple of physicists, and they wrote the alternative energy plan. It ended up the government lost the election, and that's how it is with politics. So the other part of the parliament said, oh, this is a way for us to get back in power. So they were then investing in the green energy. And for many years, Denmark was then leading in the world with green energy. Then, unfortunately, other things happened, so it's not the case anymore. But yes, of course, we can do that. But that's an example of how to change the technology and then solve a big social problem. Another technology, this is a social technology. If you look at the neoliberal policy, policies that's dominating in the Western world today, and they say that, the neoliberal policies say that too much state intervention in the marketplace create an environment for gross infringement on personal liberty, and this Hayek and Friedman and others they talked about that actually all the way back during or after the Second World War. So the impact of so to say, putting public institutions by sort of putting the market in there, so it's controlled by or governed by state-controlled market principles, has done a number of things. If you look at, for instance, here, this is the years. This is from before the First World War, and this is today. This is how much. This is the difference between the people, the top earners in the American society, and the bottom earners. And the people, the economists are talking about the big compression. You can see that there is not that much of a difference between the top and the bottom. But today, the difference between the top and the bottom has exploded. So it's like it was before the First World War. And this is, we don't see it nearly as much in the European countries, but I can tell you Denmark being quite a sort of a social conscious society, we certainly see a growing disparity also. This is productivity as a function of time. This is American data too, and this is the hourly compensation for people both in the public sector and in the private sector. You can see there is this growing gap. This is not because of technology, physical technology. This is a social technology. The idea, the belief that the market, if you just put the market in and let the market clear everything, then we are more free. And you know, it's a beautiful idea, but it has some problems. So one of the things that we can do here is thinking about, I'm sad there are not more economists, but Eric Weinhauger and from Oxford School of New Economic Thinking, he's proposing together with Nick Hanauer that he's a billionaire from the US, that instead of measuring, maybe today, instead of measuring the wealth in GDP, I mean, how much can you get on the market for a certain dingwit or thing or for a certain service, maybe we should do what the World Bank has been doing in the developing countries. How much access do you have to solutions? And what does that mean? Well, the economy at the end of the day, why are we actually doing, why are we making stuff to each other? Well, it's just because we want to solve human problems. So if you measure, instead of measuring how much does it cost to actually have a basket of bread and butter and whatever of your necessities, well, then it's a basket of solutions. How much does it cost? Do you have access to bread and butter in the one scenario? This is with BMP, and in the other one, access to solution. Then do you have access to healthcare? Do you have access to transportation? Do you have access to housing, etc., etc.? There are issues about measuring, but those of you, or if there were people who are economists, to actually measure, to estimate what the total wealth is in a country is not easy. There's a lot of subjectivity in that too. So we could actually, by changing the way we measure the economy, this is much more difficult than just changing physical technology. But I predict that something will have to happen, because as more and more people say, else the rest of us will come with pitchforks and eat the rich, right? Okay, so if you want to look at the big picture, what's happening as this is a number of if we can put people on an axis where out here people are really, really, really good, they have tons of skills and are very smart, and out here people are not so smart, and in the middle most of us are. So this is a number of people. So most of us can do certain things, and some few of us can do a lot of things, and there are not so many that are really dumb. Now, what is happening in this new economy is that, well, there's always been high demand on very skilled people, but this is extreme today, as you saw with Minecraft. And if you look at Google, or if you look at all the Microsoft, Facebook, Apple, they don't have very many employees. They have in the thousands, whereas the automakers, the steel makers, the the coal mines, there were millions and millions and millions and millions of people employed. Not anymore. So this is a big deal. What does that mean? Well, it means that we probably have to rethink the way our world is put together. We have to rethink how we make our institutions and how we organize our society. And guess what? Well, this is, if you can learn anything by history, well, this is the smart people. They have to figure it out. It's not going, the politicians are not going to figure it out. It's you. It's us. Here's another big picture. These are data. Here in the last few years, we've seen an explosion in big data, and some of it is kind of scary, some of it is wonderful. This is from some of our friends who's looked at, who's estimated the total wealth per capita for the English population. This is for the islands, England, because England has been a big empire, and I wouldn't really know what the difference between Great Britain, the United Kingdom, and England. There's all these definitions, but this is for the islands, and this is as a function of time. This is on a logarithmic scale. This is this is in the Middle Ages before the Black Death. Then the Black Death came, killed half of the population in England. So the rest of the population, of course, got wealthier because they inherited the land and whatnot. Back then, economics was a zero-sum game. There wasn't any innovation. For hundreds of years, people lived in the same way as they did 100 years before. Well, and the church was sitting on all the knowledge, and they made sure that the populace only read the Bible if they read anything. So these are, you can see that, well, anyways, I can tell many stories, but I think it's really fascinating. This is where they plundered the colonies and blah, blah, blah. Anyways, the important thing here is that at some point, this is a log scale, this is the Industrial Revolution. You can see it really takes off. This is the wealth per individual. This is the same one for Sweden. It doesn't go quite as far back. You can see there is a dramatic change once we get to the Industrial Revolution. And that's how we've, so what are we doing here in this era? We have great inventions and insights, and we then make innovations, and this is very popular to talk about that today. We make innovations that are then put to the market, where we take these great discoveries and figure some smart things out about them, so we can actually sell them in the marketplace. And that means that the economy is no longer a zero-sum game. It's expanding, and we get more and more wealth. But does this continue? If there were any biologists, psychologists, you would be suspicious, and because we don't know any curves in biology that just goes to heaven. At some point, they level off. So it's really a sobering experience. We've this is Rosenløs, Sabine, and myself. We've here in the last couple of years, we've looked at economic data for about 40 countries, and we look for 1 month, and then we make our analysis, and then a few months later, there are more countries that are coming online. It's really wonderful. But here you see, this is a trend. If you go in, this is not for Sweden and it's not for England, this is actually for Denmark. If you remove the trend, then you get the deviation from the trend. So here you have higher growth than the average, hyper exponential growth here. Here you have lower growth, here you have higher growth, here you have higher growth, here you have lower growth. This is the Second World War. Anyways, it turns out that Denmark is representative very representative for the European countries. We are not affected as much by the Second World War. You can see here, if you compare this is in current price, a little bit different. You compare the Danish data with the American data, it fits almost perfectly. And there is a difference between Chile, Argentina, India, and Sri Lanka. The only countries we found where there isn't this incredible dip in the economic growth rates. So then the question is, of course, what is that? Well, so Carl Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, he said that this big transition is just another of these swings. So we can expect that there will be another wave of prosperity coming here. And you could, so we are not seeing a change like we saw from being farmers, all of us, to going into the industrial era. But some of us, we believe that maybe what we are seeing, there's so many indicators that show that it's probably not just being another economic big wave we'll see, that we have to change more fundamentally to actually have a good life if it doesn't end up with Ragnarok. So we believe that what we are seeing is that we are in a transition that can be compared with the transition from the hunter-gatherers to the agrarians, where we actually were we were living we were making agriculture, and then to the industrial era. And if Karl Schwab is right, then we can continue. We don't need to change our institutions. We don't need to change our education. We don't need to change our laws. It's easy. But if we are in one of these qualitative transitions, we have to get to work and really re-engineer how our society should be. And I'd like to leave you with that, because this is something you can think about over Christmas, but I hope we will be able to talk more about that in the new year. Thank you very much.